have music at the gazebo. It's gonna be Savage Daughters, 6 to 7:30. Thursday, August 13th, we're going to Bison Trace, the campgrounds. Lynn and Marlene are gonna talk about their latest trip to Italy, so we'll have pizza, 2 slices of pizza and a drink for $12. We're meeting at 11:30. Thursday, August 20th at 1 o'clock, we're gonna learn about the World War II Finley Lake Snoozer newsletter. It was published 1943 to 1946. So it should be very interesting. I don't know if anybody's familiar with a snoozer. There it is, S-news.
Kelly is.
So anyways, it's a Finley Lake thing. So go ahead, Mike, thank
Okay.
you for coming.
Well, thank you. Thank all of you for coming out on a beautiful day like today and not out on your boat cruising the lake. So welcome to my presentation of Women in Espionage during the Civil War. And as I've gone through and developed this series, I thought, well, I'll concentrate on what I know, since my profession was.
Could you try again? Concentrate as a form of substance.
I'm glad it's you and not me.
Substance.
I thought I turned it off. Hang on a second. Now it's off. You know, we hear everything. I get asked that quite frequently. It's, oh, you probably have my house budget and so forth. And you go, well, it's not that we couldn't, but why would we? You know, so ask yourself that question sometimes, you know. Big Brother is big, but it's, you know, I get the same question when I'm home in Iowa on the farm. And they said, well, Mike, I know you got a file on me. I go, really? Is that because your crop production was down here? But anyway, so today's topic is women of espionage, and I'll go through various women that participated in espionage during the Civil War, both sides, North and South. And let me start off with whoop, you've already heard that. A little quote here to set the mood for our talk on espionage. And it states, and I will read this part, among the potential pool of spies, there are those who are disgruntled or disenchanted, those who will seek revenge against a real or imagined grievance, and those who are driven by money, and those who are egotistical and subject to flattery. You know anybody like that? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Who do you think said that? Anyone? George?
Sun Tzu.
Sun Tzu? Sun Tzu wrote The Art of War in 500 BC. And The Art of War still is mandatory reading at West Point, the last time I checked anyway. Sun Tzu was way ahead of his time. But it shows you how old the practice of espionage is. And they do call it the second oldest profession for a reason. I'll let you decide what you think the first oldest profession was. But let me set the stage a little bit. We're going to talk about the significance of espionage and what impact it had on battles and the outcome of the Civil War to a greater extent, but probably more uniquely why women were in a position to perform those duties of gathering intelligence. And I'll talk about methodologies and have a demonstration on their ciphers and codes in invisible ink, okay? So, anyway, Just thought I'd point out, and as you came in, I had a bigger storyboard up there with the Civil War. I frequently get asked, West Virginia. Was West Virginia a state in 1861? No. Do you know when it became a state?
Exactly, it was war related.
Yeah, 1863, June of 1863, became a state, and it fell on the northern side. But there was also a lot of family infighting over that. So anyway, I just want to set that stage first, and then as we go through, I'll talk about some of the significant battles that happened, and everyone knows Gettysburg and Vicksburg, perhaps Antietam, but not everybody knows Bull Run, and which had a particular impact by the espionage that gathered intelligence on behalf of the South and enabled them to secure victory at least the first battle was Bull Run. Did they secure both?
Yes.
Bull Run, yeah. And Bull Run, just from a personal standpoint, it was in Manassas, Virginia. Bull Run Park was about 7-8 miles from our house when we lived in Virginia, so it became more important to me later on because there was a spy in the 80s, Brian Reagan, who would go out to the park in Bull Run and drop off at dead drops messages to the Russians and demanding money. But anyway, so the profile, first you got to know that there was over 100 women involved in espionage during the Civil War. I'm not going to talk about all 100 because we would be here all day, but I will hit on some of the significant ones. And I brought a few books too, if you want to, or a copy of my reading room up here that goes into more detail on some of those women. But they were mostly white, but not exclusively. And I'll talk more about that when we come to some of those. They usually were well-to-do. And you go, well-to-do, why would people of means want to commit espionage? Well, you gotta kind of remember, and I've said this before, there's 4 main reasons, categories that people commit espionage: money, ideology, coercion, or ego. There's subsets to those. But unlike other wars or other periods of time, the main issue or category that the women of the Civil War committed espionage for was ideology. They didn't get rich doing this. They believed in their cause, whether you were an abolitionist or if you wanted to defend the Southern way of life. And so they volunteered, and now I know you ladies will be surprised by this. They were very effective because they were underestimated by men. Shocked, I know.
Isn't that funny?
See, yeah, isn't it nice that that's changed?
Yeah, oh yeah, turned right around.
So, some of the things that they did, they reported on troop size, they were able to obtain enemy plans and so forth, and fortifications and supplies. So they knew where the enemy was, how they were positioned, and in battle, that really can affect the outcome for the side that was getting that information. They employed some rather unique methodologies as far as rolling up messages in their hair to secrete it out of a location and get it to whoever their contact was. They sewed messages in their petticoats. Even one would do a very small message and fold it all up and put it in her brother's buttons, and sew the button back on his uniform, and he would then take it to the respective. So they were quite inventive. They smuggled morphine and ammunition in baskets, inside dolls, sometimes inside of a loaf of bread, inside a hollowed out egg. So they used all sorts of means to, because what good is collecting intelligence if the people you're trying to keep it from find out right away what it was about. So they also dressed as men and used accommodation addresses. All right, anyone here know what a accommodation address was? This is something that we used in the agency to this day. In other words, if I wanted to get mail to Mike Ganske, but not Mike Ganske's true name, I would go to an alias and recruit one of you to get my secret mail. And then we would exchange and so forth. And that's what's called an accommodation address. They hung black dresses from a dormer window to warn that Union soldiers were near. This was a practice that was first done in the Revolutionary War with Washington's Secret Six. They would hang petticoats or towels or whatever. If it was black, and don't come around. If it was white, then it was usually okay. So they had means of communication that don't have the cell phones or beepers or two-way radios that we have today to communicate with each other. Little quote from General Grant. The art of war is simple enough. Find out where your enemy is, get at him as soon as you can, strike him as hard as you can, and off him as you can, and keep moving on. Kind of sounds like General Grant, doesn't it? No nonsense, let's get the job done and move on. And, you know, I see the parallels today that maybe we can draw from that. Maybe we should be a little swifter and get the job done and move on. All right, enough of the background. Let's talk about some Union female spies first. Elizabeth Van Loo, Mary Bowser, Sarah Emma Edmonds, Pauline Cushman, and Harriet Tubman. You might recognize the last name, Harriet Tubman. Where do we know her from? Underground Railroad. And she ran one of the biggest spy rings in the Civil War, as well as the Underground Railroad.
She was slight.
Huh?
I forgot to say she was black and.
Well, I'm getting to it.
It's important.
Yeah. So, let me talk about Elizabeth Van Loo first. She provided the Union. Now let me make a statement. Now today we have 17 government agencies that all collect intelligence different ways, and we all send it into a central point, and it gets dispersed out to national security team, the president, vice president, secretary of state, all that. But it's getting better at being coordinated. Back in Civil War times, Elizabeth Van Loo and all the others worked for one general, and that's who they communicated with. So she provided the location of Southern artillery. She knew where 3 Confederate units disbanded due to lack of horses, and when the Confederacy sent Union's prisoners to Andersonville. Elizabeth Van Loo lived in Richmond in a very wealthy family, but her background was that she was a Quaker and didn't believe in war to begin with, but then was educated in Philadelphia, where she became an ardent abolitionist, and so was her mother. And so after her father died, and I'll get into this in a minute, he freed some of his slaves, and Elizabeth Van Loo used some of those slaves to continue to gather intel for the cause. So after the war, she was appointed postmistress by then President Grant, and died in 1900. Speaking of one of her slaves, was Mary Jane Bowser. And she was born Mary Jane Richards. She married a free slave by the name of Wilson Bowser in 1861. Initially, all she did was convey food and books to Union soldiers in prison and so forth. But later on, Elizabeth would send messages through Mary to General Grant and others that depicted the positions of Southern, because Elizabeth was, I failed to mention, she was a debutante in Richmond. And so she entertained, I'm using the delicate word, entertained Southern generals in her home quite a bit, and she was able to gather a lot of information, but that information is only good as long as you can get it to the people who need it. So she used Mary because, again, underestimated by men. At that time, all African Americans were illiterate, didn't know how to read or write. Mary did, but so they didn't pay her much attention and kind of ignored her, and therefore she was an excellent conduit of information. She aided the escape of many prisoners, and she actually infiltrated the Jefferson Davis White House, which was in Richmond. And how many have been to Richmond, Virginia? Two of you, and you know where Washington, D.C. is. We're really not talking that far apart, are we? What, 95 miles, 96 miles, something like that? Depends on which back road you take. But they're not that far apart. So you had the Southern Confederate White House in Richmond, and of course the White House in Washington, D.C. And Mary actually became an employee of Jefferson Davis, and so she had access of serving them meals, and the Southern generals sitting around the table. Oh, we're going to attack here or there, and so forth. So greatly aided the success of the Union with that information.
Mike,
Yeah.
you want to tell everybody Elizabeth Van Loo's nickname?
Remember
crazy vet.
Yeah.
Because she put on this air of being a little off-center. And so it broke down anybody's
It
suspicions.
provided her a cover story, you know, because we've seen that used before in espionage. If you dress as a country buck and who looks a little off in the head, they don't pay any attention to you, right, Rick?
What she would do, and purposely,
Yeah,
was when she was out walking on the streets, you know, in town, she would talk to herself.
yeah.
And back then, that was really considered, if you're
that's
talking to
wrong?
yourself, you're deemed crazy.
Yeah.
And that's the look that she was going for.
Yeah. So Elizabeth was, she was a big help to the Union cause and so forth. Emma Edmonds was born in Canada and kind of worked on the family farm up there. But when she moved down to the States, she disguised herself as a man and took on the name of Frank Thompson. So when she arrived in Connecticut, she got a job selling Bibles. And but in 1861, after the war broke out, she actually became a Union field nurse. Well, in 1862, she started creating her own disguises and became a spy for the Union, and even using, to the point where in her disguises she would use silver nitrate solution to color herself as black, and became Ned then as a black man. So at Yorktown, then that battle particularly she had great impact on, and sketched maps and reported to General McClellan, but then died in September of 1898, is really the only female member, officially acknowledged member of the Grand Army of the Republic. There were other females who dressed as men and fought as men in the Civil War, but she was really a member of
How
the
much a Grand Army of the Republic was?
Grand Army of the Republic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure.
Oh, well, you know about our American Legion,
Yeah.
our VFW, our veterans are supported, and the Grand Army of the Republic were Civil War soldiers and veterans who were supported as well.
Mhm.
And then they had different places all across America, like
Sure.
And we had one in Finley Lake,
Yeah.
and that's where Billy Wolf lives now.
Yeah.
Grand
And
Army
some of their
Republic, yeah.
some of their tombstones even reflect Grand Army of the Republic. As you know, I go around every spring to 7 different cemeteries and place the flags, and so I get to see where Revolutionary War, which we have 5 in Clymer. You've got 3 out here on that back road at the peak. It's a real small little cemetery. You got 3 Revolutionary War and a couple Civil War out there. You know, so it's quite a representation. And you kind of, at first I went, well, surely they didn't come from Clymer. No, but they settled there, and that's consequently why they're buried there. And as I was talking with George a little earlier, that in the Clymer Cemetery, we have Horace Greeley's whole family is buried there, because he spent 2 weeks in Clymer and said, I didn't get by with 2 weeks there.
So a comment on the GAR, further comment, it was more than just the American Legion. It was the most powerful non-political entity in the country. They influenced legislation for a half a century.
Yeah.
3/4 of the federal budget in the 1890s went to veterans benefits in one form or another. And it was all because of the influence and power of the GAR.
Let me introduce George Deutsch, former director of the Hagen History Center. He's an expert on Civil War, and so, I call him a friend and a fellow book member, so we have other interesting conversations about different topics.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
John wanted to come out and give my talk, so.
All right, after Sarah, we have Pauline Cushman, who's kind of a favorite of mine. She operated much more in the Kentucky, Tennessee area, and she, I like this word too, didn't entertain, but befriended Confederate troops there and to gain information. But she was an actress by profession, and she ended the war on the lecture circuit and so forth. But she died of a morphine overdose at the age of 60. But she is buried with military honors in San Francisco. I'm not sure how she got out there. But the one thing I do remember about her, she was approached, she was a strong abolitionist, but she was approached by the Union military police because the Southern Confederates wanted her to, at the end of one of her plays, do a toast to Jefferson Davis. And she was very reluctant to do that. However, when the military police from the Union said, we want you to do that because then it demonstrates to everybody that you're a Southern sympathizer, and that takes the pressure off of you when you go about trying to collect information. But colorful. Harriet Tubman, which we've already noted, she's best known probably for the Underground Railroad, but she also was very active, especially in South Carolina, with she had developed a spy ring of fellow African Americans who worked in the homes of generals and so forth, and she would gather information, have them gather information, even though they may be illiterate. She would take that information and get it up to Washington and to Grant or others who could deal with that. But one of the more significant things she did, she became second in command down in South Carolina to a Colonel James Montgomery. And I've been to the monument down there. It's in Beaufort, South Carolina. And it's where they, in Hilton Head itself, kind of was a Union stronghold in the South, especially in South Carolina. But they freed, got 700 slaves freed out of prison down there. So she was very significant in that regard. And of course, we all know about her efforts in the Underground Railroad. And you can see where some of that even comes up not too far from us. Buffalo has an Underground Railroad site, historical site that you can visit, and so forth. So they got them out of where they could. Some went to Canada, and some went down to the Caribbean even. But that took quite a bit of organization in and of itself. That's the night raid in 1863, where they freed, I guess I underestimated it, 750 slaves, and destroyed a Confederate supply depot. I like this one quote from her. There was one of two things I had a right to, liberty or death. I could not have one, I would not take the other. For no man should take me alive. I should fight for liberty as long as my strength lasted. So, quite a remarkable woman. And up in Auburn, New York is where she retired. Unfortunately, it took years and years and years to get a pension out of the U.S. government for all that she did. And but they finally bought her a house up in Auburn, New York, and that's where her burial site is. And they have a museum up there with her, if you're ever traveling in that area. But she died in 1913, full military honors. And in 2022, we erected a statue to her at CIA headquarters because of her efforts in eliciting information, gaining information that helped secure the victory for the Union forces. All right, equal time. Maybe not equal, but the Confederacy. Robert E. Lee. It behooves us to be on the alert or we will be deceived. So you got to be paying attention to who's around you and so forth. Let me talk about a couple ladies, Rose O'Neill Greenhow, Antonio Ford, Laura Radcliffe, and Belle Boyd were all notable female spies for the Confederacy. Rose O'Neill Greenhow was born in 1823 near Martinsburg, Virginia. So Martinsburg, that's in West Virginia. In 1823, it was just Virginia, like we talked about. In 1863, is by the time West Virginia became a state. She had a colorful past. A Union soldier had come to their house and had berated her mother and actually shoved her. So she shot him at 17. And she actually was acquitted of that. But you got to understand where she was at the time. But she had married a Dr. Robert Greenhow, and so she was kind of a queen of society in Washington, D.C. But her reign of debutante to all the important people in Washington ended with her arrest by Alan Pinkerton, name you might be familiar with, Pinkerton Detective Agency and so forth. He was brought in at the beginning of the war to kind of create an intelligence organization. Didn't really work all that well, but he did perform a lot of duties for the Union forces and so forth. Now, one of the first significant things that Rose provided was information on Bull Run. And as you may know from your history books, there was 2 battles of Bull Run. And I think it was maybe overconfidence on the Union side, but they were sorely beaten at the first battle of Bull Run. But it was all because of the information that Rose had provided. Rose befriended, entertained, lover of different important people in Washington at the time. Was the Senator Henry Wilson, who was the chairman of military affairs. There's two other senators. There's a cabinet member or two that she entertained. But she had delivered all this information to Thomas Jordan, who then got it to Beauregard, General Beauregard, via the secret line. And I'll talk about the secret line in a minute. But one of her quotes, "God gave me a brain and a body, and I shall use both." And she did. You see on that last line, she drowned while trying to return to the States in 1864. She had been in prison for a while. Pinkerton had arrested her. She was in prison, and there's a colorful story that goes, she involved her daughter when she was being arrested. She had her daughter go to the upstairs window and shout to the world that, "My mom's being arrested, my mom's being arrested," you know. This was in DC. Anyway, Rose ended up going to prison, along with Little Rose too, I believe. I think they were both in prison. And once she got out, the South sent her to Europe to try to secure funds and monies for their cause and so forth. So upon her return, they encountered a ship that was engaging in battle there, so she took to a rowboat, and she was loaded down with gold coins. Historians have two different versions of it. Some it's sewn in her dress, some it's on a backpack type of thing. But enough to, when the boat capsized, she went down. And so, I'd like to find that gold. But she drowned trying to return to the States and continue on with her mission to defend the Southern way of life. Antonio Ford. Antonio Ford was also from a wealthy Virginia family. She lived much closer in. Her house was in Fairfax, near the courthouse, for those that have been to downtown Fairfax. I know George going to school down there, you probably got out to Fairfax a time or two.
Yeah, I lived out there.
Yeah, so I used to do background investigations out there, so. So she was fairly close by, but Union soldiers occupied her home in Fairfax, which she didn't agree with, and then started providing information to Judge Stewart. And she also helped Colonel Mosby, Mosby Raiders. Anyone in the history books? Helped capture General Stoughton. But she was eventually captured by the Secret Service. And, but General Stewart gave her a commission. And while she was in prison, she married one of her captors, a gentleman by the name of Joseph Willard. And then after the war, they moved back to the family home in Fairfax. And her son became the Lieutenant Governor of Virginia. So mine's always mixed. But she died February 14th, 1871 at the age of 33. And I think it was some respiratory disease that she had. Laura Radcliffe Also was from nearby Herndon, Virginia. Herndon being one of the suburbs that Julie and I lived in when we lived down there. And but she warned John Mosby of the pending, the Union forces had planned to capture him and or assassinate him, and she was able to warn John Mosby of that. And Jeb Stewart hid greenbacks in her home there in Herndon, which is called Marybrook, and it's out by Frying Pan Park. Anyone? No. Anyway, but, you know, and I used to drive by this sign when we lived down there, and I should really stop and take a look at that sometime. And it wasn't only when I started to do research for this little project that I went, oh, I know where that is, you know, it's right by Frying Pan Park in Herndon, Virginia. And that denotes Laura Radcliffe's synopsis of her life and what she did for.
What would the C-24 mean?
Huh?
Do you know what the C-24 means?
On the
On the plaque name?
Confederate?
I think those are state of Virginia. When you get down there, the Daughters of the Confederacy have plaques, you know, roadside. In the state of Virginia has roadsides, and it's probably a code as to who produced it and, you know, what number it was in the
Yeah.
long list of roadside markers.
Yeah.
Like a mile marker.
Yeah.
Historical.
Historical.
Their history. But what about Jeb Stewart?
What about,
He was very important.
oh yeah?
When Lee lost him, he thought he, you know, that way. She was helping Jeb Stewart.
Yeah,
Said
yeah.
he was a cavalry officer
Mm-hmm.
in the early days, yeah.
Well, and he's one of those names
I like his name.
that you do get, and I don't, JEB stands for,
James Ewell Brown.
that's why I asked George
Thank
to
you very
come.
much.
Let me talk briefly on Isabel Marie Bell Boyd. Now, Bell also was a debutante, socialite in the DC area, but she was also considered the Cleopatra of the secession. She had great charm. She used various methods to elicit information from her well-connected guest that she entertained, and but she worked directly for Stonewall Jackson and was able to put messages in that hollowed-out watch and pass information. And there weren't wristwatches in those days, pocket watch type thing, and was able to get a lot of information to Stonewall Jackson that way, and she was awarded the Southern Cross. She was arrested a couple times. She married a gentleman by the name of Samuel Harding and moved to England after the war, and where she gave lectures on her life as a spy. She's my inspiration. She was remarried twice and then died in Wisconsin, and I never found out why she was in Wisconsin in 1900. But anything on Bell Boyd? But I think this epitomizes my point about ideology being the main motivator for espionage during the Civil War. If it is a crime to love the South, its cause, and its president, then I am a criminal. I would rather lie down in this prison and die than leave it owing allegiance to a government such as yours. She didn't care if she got paid. It wasn't about her ego. It was about her ideology in the Southern way of life. Now, I did talk a little bit that we would communicate about some of the methodologies that they used. Civil War was, I think, the first war that they used balloons for overhead reconnaissance. In other words, inflate a balloon, go over the battle site, you know, and you could tell, well, McClellan had his armies here or there, or, you know, where the artillery was and so forth. It was the first war that the telegraph became much more commonly used. And one of my favorites is ciphers and codes, and the Southern folks had a unique cipher wheel. And it's a little hard to explain, but this is a replica. There are 5 left from the actual Civil War in various museums and so forth. But one enterprising guy says, well, I can duplicate that. So I said, well, I gotta have one. But what you do, I'll give the broad version. You have a common keyword so that we know, okay? So Rick and I know that Confederate, we'll use that. So you write out the word Confederate, C-O-N-F-E-D-E-R-A-T-E. And then on the first and then you write out your plain text message. Attack at dawn, A-T-T-A-C-K. Well, your first A goes, you gotta put C in the position first, and then you see what letter it comes up with, and it's not A, you know. So then for the second letter, you gotta use the second letter of your keyword, which is O, and then you spin the dial again, and you get a different letter. So even when it goes TT, it's not TT because you're using different keyword or key letters. So that's how they did it. So it took a little while to decipher, and it's taken me a lot longer to figure out how to use this thing. But more than welcome to take a look at this when we get done. But and there's a couple sheets here who can explain it a lot better than I can. So anyway, that's just one of the ciphers that they used. They also used invisible ink, and I think I've shown you all this before when I did the Revolutionary War here, because invisible ink's been around for a long, long time. There's 2 ways to make invisible ink. One with an acid-like liquid, let's say lemon juice, and then you have a contradictory stain that reveals that, but you can't see it on a piece of paper. But if you apply the stain, then you can see it, but it's kind of neat. And why did they use invisible ink? So if you got caught with a message, then they look at this letter that you're trying to deliver as a messenger, and the letter looks like a letter to Aunt Martha or Uncle George, you know, and family's well, the cow had 2 calves this spring, you know, whatever might say, and then you, in the midst of the letter, you write in invisible ink, and then when it got to the destination, you applied the stain or put it over a lighted surface. And in today's world, they just give me, I cheat, I have a black light, you know, and then you can read the invisible ink. So And there's other codes that they've used over the years, substitution codes, very simply, a simple substitution code, 1 equals A, 2 equals B, 3 equals, and then all you see is numbers. Well, you can usually decipher that pretty quickly, but a better one is a book code. And that's when you have 2 of the same book, and you write out 34, 7, 8, page 34, line 7, word 8. But if you don't have the 2 same books, and I mean the same books, not just Bibles, but, you know, they have to be the same publisher. So that's just one of their methodologies. Of course, now codes are much more sophisticated and they're electronic and so forth. So there's,
So by what means did the balloons relay information? I don't understand.
well, what they had was little pods where they would write a message. The Confederates have, General McClellan has this many battalions on this hill, and they would drop the pod and to a designated site where someone from the Union would pick that up and take it to the military leaders. So,
They also could connect if most of the balloons were tethered.
yeah.
And so they actually would run a telegraph down. So the operators
That's
in the
right,
balloon would signal the ground station would then make sure the key person that needed to know the information.
In our early overhead reconnaissance satellites, we would drop pods, information, you know, like they're amassing, 100 tanks on the Chinese, Manchurian border, or wherever, whatever it happened to be, but that's how, of course, now it's all electronic, so it's not like that anymore, but some of the early satellites were the same principle. The secret line I mentioned before, this was it's almost like the Pony Express, and you can read that if you want, but let me show you the picture of it, which is a little better. So if they would gather information in Washington, and then they had different spots that you could take a message to, and then that messenger would take it to the next messenger, to the next messenger. It's kind of like Pony Express, and finally get down to Richmond. So,
Or the Underground Railroad.
well, kind of, but not for people, but for information.
And did they purposely use multiple messengers, so
Yeah.
no one knew where it started and where it was
Right.
going?
And you know, if you're the first messenger, I don't even know your name, but you come to my house, drop a envelope off or whatever, and I only knew to go to point 3, you know, so 1 knew about 2 and 2 knew about 3.
But one didn't know about 3.
Yeah, correct.
I think so, they keep swallowing.
So we're not all as dim-witted as sometimes perpetrated to be, but couple books I thought I'd recommend if you have interest in learning more about some of the female spies of the Civil War. I have 3 of the books here. Women in the Civil War, a small little one. Petticoat Spies. The bigger book by Karen Abbott, Liar, Temptress, Soldier, Spy. It is a nonfiction book, but it reads like a novel. So, to me, that's a little more interesting reading than sometimes fiction can be. All right. Any questions, discussions? Yeah,
I'll take Mary Bowser one step further. She, of course, was integrated into the Confederate White House. And she got to be so trusted, and she was so good at hiding that she had been educated in Philadelphia and knew how to read and write, et cetera, that ultimately she became the maid for Jefferson Davis's offices. So at the end of the day, he would leave and she'd go in and tidy up, dust and whatnot. She'd read all the dispatches and all the stuff that he had on his desk and, straighten them out and then get that information to a crazy vet who would then get it to the union. So,
and I've heard it described in today's parlance that she had a photographic memory. And so she could remember, when she read things, she could remember pretty much word for word.
And that just gives you an example of the blinders that Confederates had, because it was illegal to teach a slave to read and write,
Yeah,
and throughout the South. But the fact that they were so much in that mindset, they never suspected.
right.
And, she was able to read all the military stuff off the president's desk every day.
Yeah. So, that's a source.
I have a
Yeah,
question. I forget her name, but the spy with the gold around her neck or, that drowned.
yeah,
They sent her over to Europe.
yeah.
And
To,
do they know
why?
who was over there and who was supporting the South?
Well,
In Europe, but that-
they went to France and England because there were sympathizers. And I think she just went to those two countries, but I'm not sure. But those were the countries where there were some sympathies. Not so much that they supported the Southern way of life, but they didn't want to see the Union succeed. And some of them, especially in England, still were the colonies, so some of them still wanted him back, right?
Yeah, just to add on to, you had the one example of the woman who would put the black dress up in the window.
Yeah,
They were even more elaborate than that. They were noted that they would hang their watch
yeah,
on clotheslines outside
right,
in a certain way that meant certain things. Colors and what the article of clothing was, the length, all these things.
and the number, if it was 3, then don't go to code 3,
Right, right.
because that's where the enemy was. So,
Well, wasn't also, it was, the war between the states or the Civil War, whatever you're gonna call it, it was about slavery, but it ultimately was about money.
yeah,
And the South was targeting cotton, which was the main product
Sure,
out.
sure.
And probably Europe and France needed cotton, and, they were paying.
they didn't want to pay more money.
They didn't want to pay the tariff
Yeah.
on the cotton.
So, yeah, it was about money, it was about slavery too. I'm not dismissing that, I'm just saying there was more economic, I think, reasons than anything else, but that's,
The
but,
whole basis of the
what do you
Southern
think, George?
economy
Yeah,
was slavery. There were, tariffs, and there were, the states' rights issues and transportation issues. There's a whole bunch of things everybody disagreed on, sectionally, but none of it would have meant civil war except for slavery. Slavery was the bottom line. And,
because that allowed them to continue their way of life.
right, cotton was probably, the duties on cotton were about 60% of the federal budget in 1860. And so,
the Southerners were feeling very squeezed. The northern government, the government which was dominated by the North, was creating economic opportunities in the North that they were not getting in the South. I mean, there's a mixture of things, but it all comes down to the bottom line. They had figured out to deal with the slavery issue, which was pretty much unsolvable except at the point of gun. I doubt we would have had civil wars. Anything else? Well, thank you all for coming.
So, I
Oh,
want to
yeah.
ask you, when, after you retired, did you become more of a history buff or?
Well, yeah, I did not study this at the agency. But that was my career, was counterintelligence and collecting information and means of elicitation and so forth, because that's what we did.
But you couldn't, you couldn't study this?
No,
You didn't
we
have
just
time.
did.
Oh, you didn't.
You just did. We were concerned with our current duties and so forth, but after I retired, then I said, well, it was a good career, maybe it's a good hobby too.
Were you educated at an academy?
Iowa State University, Cyclone. Cyclone. I taught sixth grade
Oh,
before I went into the government, and
so you had a good cover.
sometimes it felt like
You were still teaching
I was still teaching sixth grade.
Then he married a climber girl.
Yeah, well, after I retired for 10 years, though, I taught counterintelligence for the Director of National Intelligence. So I taught everybody in the government the methodologies of counterintelligence, defensive counterintelligence. There's offensive counterintelligence and there's defensive counterintelligence. So defensive is more the prevention of protecting the information that we have secured and not letting our secrets go. Offensive is much more about gaining and recruiting people to get information for us. So. Anyone else?
I have an announcement when you're done.
Okay, Mary, go ahead. You got the floor.
Laura. I mentioned that we had a GAR lodge on Shady Side and Thin Lake. And from 1895 to 1915, we had a gated community that mimicked Chautauqua Institution exactly. It had the same programming, the same, everything about it was the same. But also before that was when we had our Congressional Medal of Honor recipient, Ebenezer Skelly, who was awarded that in a battle near Richmond. But so he was one of the builders of his lodge on the property that later became our little Chautauqua. So we also have every Memorial Day a list of all of our deceased veterans. So he's big on that list. But we've also found out more and more through so many online things now that you can, Ancestry and whatever, that we found out a lot more of our deceased Civil War veterans who were killed in action. And we do have a whole wall of them in the history room. And their histories, they all have little notebooks of the wars they were in. And we also have the same for World War II. And so we've done a lot of research on it. Also, you mentioned the guy who left Climber after Horace Greeley. We have a person in the audience whose mother did extensive extensive research because she came from Clymer. She lived near Greeley Road, north of Clymer, and between her and a former student named Clymer, Mr. Neckers, they actually wrote about his life, and they presented it at a historical meeting I went to at Chautauqua. And so I also am a member of the Chautauqua County Historical Society in Westfield. And I heard that they're going to resurrect another talk about Horace Greeley. And Rod Beckrink, who runs the Clymer Historical Society, he has more titles than I know. He's doing some research on that, so that'll be a program through the county.
Dennis is related to Horace Greeley.
Somehow through my grandmother on the Cooper side.
So if anybody ever wants to see these honorable veterans of ours, you know, just let me know. I'll open the room.
A little more about Horace Greeley. He ultimately, from here, ended up in Erie for about a year, I think it was, working in a newspaper office there. It was in Erie, and not in a, shall we say, positive way, that he uttered his famous "Go West, young man." Get out of Erie and go to explore more opportunities. But he uttered the "Go West, young man" in Erie.
Didn't he have a business there? I see the plaque in the building downtown.
Well, he worked for a newspaper.
He was a newspaper man in New York City. And the talk I heard that Mr. Neckers gave, it's thanks to him that we have Abraham Lincoln as a president. Because when he was in New York City, there was fake news going all around New York City. The newspapers were vehemently, just trash, just like some of the newspapers are today. So it's fake news back then, but he had to rally the troops.
Yeah,
to get
so he ran the New York Tribune.
Abraham Lincoln.
Just as a coincidence, I taught up at Chautauqua 2 weeks ago an entire week-long course on Lincoln in the press. And
Should have been there.
and in 1860, Lincoln gave a speech at Cooper Union College, which really established him as a serious political candidate within the Northeastern Republican group. And he was well known, better known in the Midwest, but the Cooper Union speech is one of his most interesting, and really covered that extensively. Really was an early supporter. He later became pretty hot and cold over Lincoln because he wanted to push Lincoln faster toward abolition, while Lincoln understood that he had to bring the country along gradually. So the two of them had a mid-war, pretty icy situation, and then Greeley kind of came back around. Greeley would actually run for president in 1872 on not as a Republican or Democrat, but actually as a third party. So he was an interesting character to study.
And we just dedicated a plaque in Clymer for that debate between Grant and Horace Greeley in 1872, right downtown, right across from Necker's Company, for those that know. So we try to keep up on our historical facts too. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.